Hi there, this is Eshu. I'm the abbot here at Zenwest Buddhist Society. This Living Zen-podcast is just one of the many resources we've created at Zenwest to make Zen practice and training more available and accessible to people all over the world. Instructional videos, printable resources, and much, much more are also available on our website at www.zenwest.ca. If you're a regular listener, I'd love to hear from you. So please drop me an email at office@zenwest.ca and let me know who you are, how you got started, and what brought you to Zen. Everything we make available in person and online at Zenwest is only possible because of the support of our members and associates, people like you. If the efforts of our community are making a difference in your life, I'd like to invite you to show your support and take part in making it happen by becoming an associate or member of the Zenwest Sangha. You can do this by clicking the Join Us tab on our website at www.zenwest.ca. Thank you for your support, and thanks for listening. When I first started doing Zen practice, living in Ontario, suburban Toronto, there wasn't really a Zen center that was easily accessible to me. I think I consider myself fortunate that the local bookstore had a copy of the 3 Pillars of Zen by Philip Kapleau Roshi. And it had some instructions on how to sit at the end of the book. There wasn't much internet in 1994. The resources that are available now weren't available then. So for me, this was a huge boon, just these sort of hand-drawn pictures and instructions in the back of a book. So I started sitting a lot. If you haven't read the 3 Pillars of Zen, you probably should, because it's a kind of a North American Zen classic. It's a little bit maybe bombastic. It's a reflection of a person who began studying Zen in Japan just after the Second World War. Americans studying Zen in Japan were given the most enthusiastic sort of representation of Zen. But for me, at whatever I was, 20 years old or something like that, it was great. It was very sort of testosterone-y, exciting. But a lot of the stuff that Roshi Kapleau also dealt with was around death and dying. He wrote several books about the wheel of life and death. And when I came to Victoria in 1995, I signed up for a training course to volunteer at the Victoria Hospice Society to really investigate this matter of life and death. And I think one of the motivations for me to go and pursue Zen practice further really came out of my experience with the Victoria Hospice Society in this way. I volunteered there for a couple of years, and I did all kinds of different aspects of hospice care, everything from sort of personal care. I also worked in group homes with pretty severely mentally and physically disabled people. So personal care wasn't something that I was unfamiliar with. Volunteering in people's homes, because the Victoria Hospice does a great job of trying to keep people who are dying in their homes so that they can be comfortable in familiar surroundings with the people who love them. So oftentimes volunteers would go out into the community to support the family and friends of the person who is dying and really try to support them in being able to die in their own home. And then the other aspect that I got into, which seemed like a natural sort of development, was what's called spiritual care, the spiritual care dynamic. And what I started to clarify and realize about this spiritual care dynamic is it's not as if it's something separate, I don't think. In fact, I remember in the first unit of the spiritual care training, there was a palliative care nurse who said something that I remember very clearly. They said, "Good spiritual care begins with good bowel care." This is true. If you've ever done a retreat and you haven't taken a dump in a few days, it's very difficult to be worried about your spiritual well-being. Anyway, what I found was that there were variations of two kinds of people who ended up in hospice care. And I think even when there's not a hospice, I think that we can really classify people, roughly, to some degree or other, into these two categories. The first category are people for whom death is a part of their life. This is something that they have taken the time through practice of one kind or another, whether it's meditation or prayer, spiritual reflection, just sitting with nature. But there is an awareness that death is a part of life. That death and birth are opposites, not life and death. Birth and death constitute what we call a life. And when these people came into the hospice, the experience was one that was quite beautiful. Sure, sad. Sure, full of pain. But when a person is aware of their death, even from the time of being a young person where they're not ill at all, people take time to say the things that need to be said, to do the things that need to be done. And when it comes time to die, they are able to engage in the activity of dying. They are able to say their I love yous. They're able to say their goodbyes. And they're able to let go into whatever. The other kind of people were people for whom the news of their impending demise came as a great surprise. They seem to have lived their life doing everything that they can to avoid the one thing that we as human beings, or as any beings, know for sure, is that at some point this stuff breaks apart. Whether it's a plant or an animal or a mountain or a person. This case, shouldn't use that term case, but this body, this skin bag, breaks apart. Many of these people went through life putting things off, putting off what they should say, putting off what they had to do, putting off the feelings that they had to confront and face, the questions that they may have had. They just put them off. And what I found was that working with, in the hospice, I found it very difficult, painful, to work with people who are in this latter circumstance. course you do it. There's nothing else to do in the situation where someone who is in front of you and dying asks for help. There's not much you can do but help. But it's not as if there's a sort of schedule for death. The day that you die doesn't wait until you have things all neatly sorted out. So I saw a lot of family suffering, harsh words said, anguish and upset at the fixation, the complete attachment to one's life, one's loved ones, even one's belongings. Standing at death's door saying, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. And the pain that this causes for not only the person who is dying, but the family who care about that person. And so to be in that position, offering support to the family and to the client, to this human being who's passing away, it was very difficult. Many people really like it. They find it very meaningful. And I think it is. I think it's tremendously valuable. The way that I expressed it at the time was that there are all kinds of medicine. Not every doctor wants to be an emergency room doctor. And that's what it felt like to me in this situation with individuals in hospice who were really unprepared to die. It was trauma. It was like, it was trauma. And I thought to myself, the thing that I'd like to do is really work on the other end. I'd like to work with people who don't have any idea that they're going to die yet. And maybe open that up and allow ourselves to investigate it. So that when we come to this time in our lives where we have to face our own mortality, it can be this release, letting go. In this sutra we just chanted it. We chant it all the time, this final instructions of Daito. He talks about this person living in the open fields in a leaky hut, eating root vegetables boiled in a broken pot, leading an upright life, engaged in the activity of investigating this self. And what does that mean? I think a lot of people who come to the Zenwest sits get confused by this because they say, Buddhism's all about no self. What's this about studying the self? Just before the sit this morning, I was at the hospice at 7 o'clock this morning to visit with somebody who's dying. They're having a bit of a hard time. So I just talked a little bit about this. And the question that comes up, and it comes up in Zen all the time. It should be a question that's mounted in your life, that's has a seat in your heart, is where is it that this thing, this object, this idea that I call myself comes from? I can look at you and you can look at me. I can look at a flower and a mountain and a tree, and I can know them. I can know them as the mountain and the tree and the flower and as you. Where does that me come from? Also, there is this experience of being in which I'm not aware of me or you or the tree or the mountain. So the question is, in this circumstance, where does this thing that I call I go? Where does it go? In a traditional verse that ends every night in a monastery, this great activity of birth and death is the great matter, it's the big deal. We go around worried about all kinds of things in our lives, what we're going to do for work, what kind of person we're going to get into a relationship with, how we can make more money, how we can have nicer clothes. But this fundamental question, where is it that this thing that I call I comes from? And where does it go? We don't even scratch the surface of this question in our lives. And at the end of things, all of those jobs and all of those relationships and all of those piles of money and neat things to wear, they all drop away. And this question, with the exhalation of my last breath, where do I go? Where does this I go? It's a pretty important question. All that we do in Zen, everything, from the very simple activity of breathing in, breathing out, is an investigation into this fundamental activity. We can call it in-breathing and out-breathing. We can call it birth and death. We can call it plus and minus. They're all just ways of expressing this fundamental activity that this whole cosmos engages in constantly. The way that we bow, the way that we engage with one another, with objects. Each and every koan in our tradition that we study is an investigation into this simple activity of birth and death. It is the great matter. So, I find myself sort of coming full circle this morning. Last week I went to visit the same person as well, and this morning I was asked to come and visit again. And after many years going back into this familiar smells and sights, circumstances, quiet voices of the hospice, and being with the family and the circumstances, it very much affirms the direction that I chose all of those years ago. And my hope is that in spite of all this other stuff that's happened in my practice and in the development of Zenwest, the form that we have and the organization that we've built and the relationships that we have together and the practice that we've developed, that this fundamental investigation into the activity of plus and minus, the activity of birth and death, doesn't get lost. It is the fundamental issue. When we can develop some awareness of this activity, when we develop some insight into the constant presence of this activity, when we can really grasp that throughout our lives, throughout each and every moment of our lives, we are having innumerable births and deaths. Sometimes they're virtually unnoticeable. From moment to moment, this thing who I am ceases to be. Something new is born without pause. Sometimes it's imperceptible. We say nothing has happened. But then when we look back at our lives, the course of our lives, we can also say that there are very clear moments where that person, the me that was, very clearly died. It wasn't a physical death. The body didn't drop. Thoughts, perceptions, beliefs, understandings dropped away, and something new was immediately, spontaneously born. As we become more and more familiar with this, not in an intellectual or conceptual way, but in an experiential way, we begin to see this activity unfolding all around us, all the time, in everything. And while it sounds like it could be a depressing thing to just see this activity of birth and death happening all around us, for me, I find it quite the opposite. It helps me to know the transience of circumstances. It helps me to appreciate the fragility and the just the good luck, I think, sometimes of seeing something or seeing someone or being with somebody at a particular place in a particular time. Because with all of this stuff being born and dying, arising and dissolving, moving back and forth, the chances of this happening just like it is right now, and me manifesting as I am to be able to see it, is awesome. Now, I suppose maybe there's some people who can look at basically any situation like this. Horrible things happen, and they might be able to look at it and say, oh, how wonderful to be a part of this. I can't say I'm there. But certainly, through practice, consistent investigation, I can see this activity functioning in things around me. I can see this activity functioning in my own life. And I hope, at the very least, that when my own time comes, when it comes time for me to drop this body and shuffle on, that it doesn't come as a big surprise, that I'll be able to meet it, that I'll be able to say my I love yous, and I'll be able to say my goodbyes, and I'll be able to say my thank yous, and go. All of these things that we chase after, and in all of these things I include this concept of spiritual awakening. If it's something we can grab, they drop away. We have to leave it all behind. So as much as we can chase and pursue this simple realization, this simple insight into this activity, that in fact there is nowhere for us to go. There is nothing for us to do but simply engage, investigate, and awaken to this simple activity. Thanks for listening to the Living Zen podcast. If you follow Living Zen through iTunes, I would very much appreciate it if you would take a moment to let me know what you think about it by rating or reviewing the podcast, so that new listeners can also hear what you have to say. Thank you for your time and for your support.